But I wash them too. I put some detergent and soak them in the wash tub. Do you see how much trust this Yerunda places in God, while others who have everything suffer from phobias and so forth? This man became ill when he was taken care of, and got well when he was left alone. The easy life does not help. Comfort does not fit the life of the monk. It's sheer dishonesty for those living in the desert. Perhaps you were raised spoiled, but now, if you are in good health, you must get used to hardship. Otherwise, you are not a true monk. Chapter 3. Simplify your life to avoid anxiety. Worldly happiness causes worldly anxiety. The more people distance themselves from a natural, simple life and embrace luxury, the more they suffer from anxiety. And as they distance themselves from God, they naturally cannot find rest in anything they do. This is why they go around restless. They even spin around the moon, like the belt of an engine spinning around the crazy wheel. Footnote: in the old metal shops, a crazy wheel was one not used for any other purpose except to feed the belt of the wheel. They wanted to deactivate the wheel. Since Earth cannot contain all their restlessness, worldly stress is the result of worldly happiness, of worldly pleasures and self-indulgence. Educated externally and being full of anxiety, hundreds of people, even young children, are driven to psychoanalysis and psychiatrists. New psychiatric hospitals are being built, and young psychiatrists go on for postgraduate studies. Many of them do not even believe in God or accept the existence of the soul. How can these people help the human soul when they themselves are full of anxiety? How can one feel truly comforted if he does not believe in God and in the true and eternal life after death? When man grasps the deeper meaning of his true life, stress goes away, divine consolation comes, and he is healed. If someone went to psychiatric hospitals and read the Abba Isaac to the patients, those who believe in God would get well, because they would come to understand the deeper meaning of life. People try to calm themselves with tranquilizers or with the theories of yoga, and they neglect altogether the true serenity that comes when the soul is humble and God fills it with divine consolation. And imagine how all those tourists must suffer who come from other countries to Greece and walk the streets in the hot summer sun and the dusty and noisy streets. What great pressure they must feel inside, how stressed they must be if they need all this heat and noise to find comfort. It's like their own selves are driving them away, and all they can see is in this trouble is rest. When we see a person who has everything be stressed, anxious, and sad, we must know that God is missing from his life. In the end, even wealth will make people suffer, because the material goods cannot really satisfy them. Theirs is a double affliction. I know wealthy people who have everything and are miserable. They do not even have children. They are still miserable. They are too lazy to lie down or take a walk. Fine, I told someone. Since you have some free time, do something spiritual. Read one of the hours of prayer. Read a passage from the gospel. I cannot, he said. Then I told him, try to do something good. Go to a hospital to visit some sick person. Why should I go all the way there, he says. What will become of it? Well, go help some poor person in your neighborhood. No, he says. That does not please me either. Can you believe that this person is miserable despite the fact that he has everything? Free time, numerous houses, and so on. Do you know how many people like this are in society? And these people suffer to the point that they lose their mind. What a dreadful thing. And if they happen to be independently wealthy and do not work, then they are the most miserable of all. If they at least had a job, they would feel somewhat better. Rushing back and forth makes modern life hell. People are always in a hurry, rushing from one place to another. They have to be here. The next hour they must be there. The hour after that they will have to be somewhere else. To remind themselves of their many obligations, they have to write them all down. With all this running around, it is a good thing they still remember their names. They do not even recognize themselves. No wonder. It's so difficult to see yourself mirrored in murky waters. May God forgive me, but the world has become a huge madhouse. No one thinks of the next life anymore. All they want is more and more material goods. This is why they cannot find peace and run around constantly. Fortunately, the other life exists. Considering what they have done to their lives, if people lived eternally in this life, there would be no greater hell. With the stress they have, if they lasted 800 or 900 years like people did in Noah's times, their lives would be hell. In Noah's time, they lived simple and long lives, and that's how holy tradition was preserved. What is happening now is what we read in the psalm. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Psalm 90, verse 10. 70 years is barely enough time for people to provide for their children. One day, an American doctor stopped by my cell and was telling me about life over there and how people have turned into machines. He said all they do is work. Each member of the family must have their own car. At home, to accommodate everyone, there must be 4 television sets. And they continue to work and to wear themselves out in pursuit of money so that one day they can say that they are comfortable and happy. But what do all these things have to do with happiness? Such a life, filled with stress and anxiety, is not a life but hell. What's the use of a life full of anxiety? If we all had to live this way, I would not want this life. If God were to say to these people, I will not punish you for the life you lead, but I will let you live this way forever, this for me would be pure hell. For this reason, so many people cannot stand life under these conditions and go away to the countryside, not quite knowing where they are heading and why. They form groups in nature and take part in exercises and other programs. They told me about some people who ran away and climbed a 6,000-meter high mountain. They would hold their breath, then exhale, and then inhale again more deeply. They are not getting anywhere this way. This only serves to show that their heart is overwhelmed by stress and is looking for a way out. I said to one of them, you are just digging a pit, making it larger and larger and admiring its depth. Then you fall in and down you go. We monastics are also digging, but in our pit we find precious metals. Our exercise, ascesis, has meaning because it has a higher purpose.
Yes, that's it.
Anxiety is the work of the devil. Yet on the lay people who live a spiritual life say that when they return home at night, all tired, they have difficulty saying their polyphon, and this upsets them. A footnote, this is small compline. In Greek, it literally means after the supper. When they return late at night from work and feel tired, they should never pressure themselves into anxiety, but should always say to themselves with sacrificial love, with philotimo, if you cannot read the entire polypnon, read 1/2 or 1/3 of it. And next time they should try not to get too tired during the day. They should struggle as much as they can with philotimo, entrusting everything to God, and God will intervene. The mind should always be close to God. This is the best kind of study. Yet under what does excessive spiritual ascesis look like in the eyes of God? If it happens with philotimo, man rejoices, and God rejoices too for his philotimo child. If the heart is bursting with love, it drips honey. But if the heart is bursting with selfishness, it suffers. Someone who had been trying with egotism and was stressed with anxiety said, "Oh Christ, how narrow you have made the gate. I don't fit through." But if he were trying humbly, he would have no problem fitting. Those who try fasting, vigils, and so on, but do so without getting rid of their egoism, end up making all this effort without spiritual benefit. Because they are punching the air rather than the demons. Instead of chasing away temptations, they end up becoming receptive to them, and naturally they encounter a lot of difficulty in their struggle and feel oppressed by anxiety. But those who strive greatly with humility and great trust in God rejoice in their heart, and their soul soars. We need to be careful in our spiritual life. When spiritual people are affected by vainglory, they feel very little satisfaction, and they are left with a sense of emptiness in their heart. There's no fulfillment, no rejoicing of the heart, and as their vanity increases, the emptiness inside makes them suffer even more. Where there is anxiety and despair, there is a demonic spiritual life. You should not feel anxiety over anything at all. Anxiety comes from the devil. Wherever you see anxiety, you must know that the devil has been at work. The devil will not go against the current. If there is a predisposition, he will push in that direction in order to cause us trouble and deceive us. For example, he makes a sensitive person hypersensitive. When you feel like making prostrations, the devil pushes you to make more than you can endure. And if you are not very strong, you become nervous because you go through with them. Then you feel anxious and desperation sets in, mild at first, but then worse. I remember when I was a novice, before I would go to bed, temptation would tell me, "Hey, are you falling asleep? Get up. So many people are suffering and so many people are in need." I used to get up and start my prostrations. As soon as I would try to sleep again, it would start. "Others are suffering and you are sleeping. Get up." I would get up again. I reached the point where I said, "I wish I could lose my legs. I would then be justified since I could not do the prostrations." Once during Great Lent, I barely made it because I tried to push myself more than I could endure. When, in the course of our spiritual struggle, we feel anxiety, we must know that we are not moving within the realm of God. God is not a stifling tyrant. Each one of us should struggle according to his strengths and cultivate his philotimo so that he grows in his love for God. Pressed by philotimo, his struggle, all those prostrations, metanias, fasting, komboskini, and so on will be nothing else than pure outbursts of his love, and his path would be a path of spiritual valor. In other words, one should not strive with an unhealthy fastidiousness, with the stifling stress brought about by the struggle with all kinds of thoughts. He should rather simplify his struggle, put all his hope in Christ rather than himself. Christ, if full of love, kindness, and consolation, and he never stifles, but gives abundant oxygen and divine consolation. There is a difference between discreet spiritual work and unhealthy fastidiousness. Fastidiousness, stifles the person when the internal stress it creates and the lack of discernment, so severe that one feels his head bursting with pain. Yet how can a person who naturally thinks a lot and strains his mind deal with things so as to not get overwhelmed? If he moves in a simple way, he will not get tired. But when even a little egoism comes in, then he struggles to avoid making a mistake. And this makes him tired. It's all right. A mistake here and there will not hurt, even if he gets reprimanded for it. This, for instance, would also apply to a judge who constantly has to face difficult cases and is afraid that he might give the wrong judgment and cause innocent souls to be punished. In the spiritual life, a headache is created when someone has a lot of responsibility and runs into an impasse because he has to make decisions against some people while also making sure that no one is wrong. In other words, this happens when the conscience is constantly being challenged. You must be careful, sister, to live the spiritual life not with your mind, but with your heart. And never do a job without putting your trust in God with great humility, because otherwise you will agonize and you will tire your mind and soul. It is lack of faith that hides behind anxiety, but pride can cause anxiety too. Monasticism needs austerity. Oh, these gray blankets have made your living room look so nice. This is exactly what it needed. Yaranda, how can a monk figure out whether something fits in the monastery or not? One should begin by asking, who am I, and what are my obligations given by the life I lead? The khaki uniforms, they dignify the army. The black habit dignifies the monastery. It is not fitting for the army to dress in black and the monastery in khaki. Now imagine that you wore white like the nurses. You're both called sisters, right? And the nurses wore black. Well, that would be depressing to the patients. They would become desperate and think to themselves, it seems like we're going to die and they're not being honest with us. It does not fit, no matter how you look at it. Something may be beautiful, but it may not fit monasticism. Velvet is beautiful, but if I wear a velvet cloak, it will not honor me. It will disgrace me. Do not use bright colors such as red and so on. It's not right. In other words, Yananda, all must be colorless, tasteless. Spiritual taste will follow, but someone must understand the difference. People have yet to grasp the joy of the simplicity. Look at me. I wet the broom and I sweep the spider webs from the chimney in my cell. I only do this once a year, and the wet broom creates beautiful designs, black and white shapes on the ceiling. If someone were to see them, they would think that I have painted it. Do you know how much I enjoy it? I know monks who cannot really enjoy the spiritual spirit. They rejoice in the worldly spirit. They have never felt this thrill of joy, the joy that comes from simplicity. Austerity is a great help to the spiritual life. A monk should only own what he needs and what befits him. He should limit himself to what will ease his life a bit, and not aspire to worldly possessions. For example, a military blanket will take care of his needs. He does not need a colorful or embroidered blanket. This is how simplicity and spiritual valor set in. Give things to a monk and you will destroy him. It's when he rids himself of what he owns that he finds rest. Collecting things will destroy a monk. When people send me gifts, I feel so much burdened by them, and I want to get rid of them. Or if I have something extra in my cell, I feel like I have a tight shirt on. If I do not find someone to give them to, I feel that it'd be better if I throw them away. As soon as I give them away, I feel such a great relief and freedom. Once an acquaintance of mine came and told me, Yaranda so-and-so gave me these things to bring you and ask that you pray for him to get rid of his anxiety. I told him, take them away. I do not want his anxiety to come to me. I am too old now to be going around distributing things. The elders referring distributed the gifts he received from visitors to other monks who were in need. All those things that lay people use to make their lives easier will enslave the monk instead of helping him. The monk must try to minimize his needs and simplify his life. Otherwise, he will not be set free. There's a difference between being for different jobs will make the monk less demanding. At Sinai Monastery, I used a can for making both tea and porridge. What do you think a person really needs in order to survive? In the old days in the desert, they only ate dates. They did not even light a fire. They did not need wood. Nowadays, I put a handle on a milk can and I use it for making tea or coffee. It warms up nicely in the blow lamp. But if you use a pot for making coffee or tea, you need to use a lot of alcohol to warm it. Whereas if you use a can, you only need a bit of cotton and a little alcohol and the coffee's done. And I do not even use a lamp for light. I go through the night with only one candle. In general, it helps a lot to keep things simple. You should own simple and sturdy things. What is humble and simple is appreciated even by lay people, and it will certainly help the monk. It will remind him of poverty, of pain, and of the monastic life. Once King George II from 1890 to 1947, the King of Greece, and from 1935 to 1947, 22 to 24. 1922 to 24. Quotes. Continue. Once King George visited Monastery of Great Lava on Mount Athos, and the father served him on a silver tray. When he saw it, he said, "I was expecting something simpler from you, perhaps a wooden tray. I'm tired of silver trays." You have not yet fully grasped how sweet simplicity really is. Simplicity is refreshing. Look at what a beautiful hanger I have made out of a bobbin. Very practical. You, on the other hand, go through all this trouble. You have put these very thin nails on the wall for hanging a cassock. If a bit of plaster drops, you will have to remove it every time you take the cassock off the hook. Why not put larger hooks on the wall? You have so many walls and not a nail on them. Instead, you use wooden hangers. This requires polishing, dusting, and so on. Instead of simplifying things to save time, you do the opposite. You struggle to reach perfection in material things. You should strive for perfection in spiritual things. Do not apply all your energy to making artistic things. Apply it to making the soul a work of art. Day and night, you should aim at the perfection of your soul. If you use your artistic talents for the benefit and cultivation of the soul, your little spiritual palace will be full of joy. Yarunda, some people say that the monasteries had in their possession great treasures, and this way helped preserve civilization. They probably mean the many priceless relics. Do you know when most of these relics were collected? They were collected after the fall of Constantinople. Most of these treasures used to be in the palaces. Later, they were taken to monasteries for safekeeping. Queen Maro, footnote Queen Maro from 1418 to 1487, was the daughter of the Serbian prince Georgius Brankovic, who was the second founder of the holy monastery of St. Paul in the Holy Mountain. Maro married Sultan Murat, the father of Muhammad the Conqueror, and donated to the monastery of St. Paul the holy gifts of the Magi, many sacred relics and heirlooms. Preserved to this day in the holy monastery of St. Paul on Athos is the original will of Queen Maro, by which she bequeathed to the monastery all the movable, valuable items that she possessed. To continue. For example, would take them piece by piece from the Sultan and move them there. Others would bequeath them to a monastery upon their death to prevent them from being lost. It was not the monasteries that sought these treasures, but their owners, who wanted them there for safekeeping. Others would give their wealth to the monasteries of the Holy Mountain, so that the poor would be fed and cared for, since back then there were no homes for the aged, no orphanages or psychiatric hospitals and philanthropic institutions. Big estates were also donated to the monasteries, so that they could have the means to provide assistance to the many lay people in need. Those were difficult times, but people back then had the vision to help the poor materially so that they could later help them spiritually. When poor people went to the monasteries, the monks would give them, as a small blessing, some money, and parents were in this way able to provide for the marriage of their son or daughter. Their aim, in other words, was to give help to the poor, and that's why they built all those big buildings. Do you know how many people the monasteries helped during the German occupation? A lot. Back then, when a family was particularly hospitable and helpful to others in need, they would be called Karakalos, after Karakalu Monastery. This is one of the 20 monasteries on Holy Mount Athos that was famous for its hospitality. This was the reason the monasteries would have a great celebration on the feast day of their patron saint, so that poor people would come, eat some fish, have a good time, but also benefit spiritually. Why would anyone today go to a monastery to eat fish, since people have everything they need? Luxuries will turn monks into lay people. Yet under how much decoration is appropriate in a church? Considering the era in which we live, which is not Byzantium, The simpler the decoration is, even in a church, the better, for simplicity always helps. What would be a good design for the iconostasis, for example? A monastic design, modest, simple. St. Pachomius footnote, was born in Upper Themes of Egypt about 280 AD. After completing his military service, he began his ascetic life in an abandoned pagan temple. In about 320, after a divine vision, he founded the first monastery of the Tabernacians in Upper Thebes. In all, he founded 9 monasteries for men and 2 for women. He fell asleep in the Lord in 346. He is considered the founder of Cenobitic life in Egypt. To continue. St. Pachomius had a column bent so that people would not admire his work. Do you recall what happened? He had constructed a church in the monastery with great diligence and made the columns using clay bricks. When he saw how beautiful it was, he felt great joy. Then he realized that enjoying a beautiful piece of work which one has made is not God's will. He tied the columns with ropes, and after he prayed, he told the brothers to pull it until they were bent. Every year, at my cell, I'll cut some metal sheets and cover my leaky roof and broken windows so that the wind will not come in. I use planks of wood and nylon. Now you might say, why don't you put double windows? I know how to do that. I am a carpenter. If I wanted, I could have made windows with 3 barriers, but then there would be no monastic spirit left inside. The wall is in shambles. I could ask others to help me take care of the cell, but I can make do with the way things are. Why should I spend money on a wall when there is so much need elsewhere? This does not help me. If I have a 500 drachma bill, I prefer to buy some crosses and icons and give them to someone in need to help him. It gives me great joy to give to others. Even if I need something, I will not spend the money on myself. Just as a novice in the spiritual life cannot get enough of it, so too when one starts enjoying beautiful things, it is difficult to stop. Do you know what must be done now? You must stop taking care of well-made buildings. Do only what is absolutely necessary for your life, and instead turn your attention to human misery. You should give. You have things to give. And pray. You must pray and only do those chores that are absolutely necessary. All these things that usually take our time are really so short-lived. Is it worth wasting our life when so many are suffering and people are dying from starvation? The simple buildings and the humble belongings transport the monastics mentally to the caves and the austere dwellings of our holy fathers and are of great spiritual benefit. Worldly belongings recall the world and turn monks into secular souls. Recently, this was said in 1986, excavations in Nitria, northwest of Cairo, Egypt, toward the Libyan desert, the cradle of Christian asceticism. Excavations unearthed the first cells of the monks, their ascetic dwellings. When they unearthed cells built later, they realized that those were closer to secular standards than the earlier ones. And when more recent structures were unearthed, they saw that they resembled the living rooms of a wealthy person at that time, all with paintings and pictures on the walls and so on. It was these well-decorated cells that brought the wrath of God. Criminals robbed and destroyed them. Christ was born in a manger. If we find comfort in worldly things, Christ will turn his back to us, something he never did to anyone. He will say, I had nothing, why did you need so much? Is that what is written in the Gospels? Did you see me do as you're doing? You do not live in the world, you are monks. What should I do with you? Where should I put you? What is beautiful and well-made belongs to the world and cannot comfort those who want to live a spiritual life. There is no wall that will not eventually be torn down. One soul is worth more than the entire world. What must we do for the soul? We must begin spiritual work. We must have only the right kind of concern. Christ will ask us what spiritual work we have accomplished, how we have helped the world in spiritual matters. He will not ask what buildings we made. He will not even mention them. We will be held accountable for our spiritual progress. I want you to grasp what I am trying to say. I am not saying that one must not construct buildings and not construct them well, but one must take care of the spiritual life first and then mind the rest, and do all that with spiritual discernment. Simplify your lives. Secular people say, how lucky are the wealthy people who live in palaces and have all kinds of conveniences. In truth, blessed are those who have succeeded in simplifying their lives and freeing themselves from the yoke of worldly progress, of the many conveniences that have become inconveniences, and have consequently rid themselves of the dreadful anxiety that plagues so many people today. If man does not simplify his life, he will end up tormenting himself. But if he simplifies it, all his anxiety will go away. A German man at Sinai told a very intelligent Bedouin boy, "You are intelligent. You can become literate." "And then?" the boy asked. "Well, then you'll become a car mechanic." "And then?" the boy repeated. "Then you will open a car shop." "And then?" the boy asked again. "Then you will grow up and you will hire others to work for you. You will have your own staff." In other words, the boy said, I will pile one headache on top of the other. Isn't it better now that my mind is free of worries? Most headaches are the result of all these thoughts we have about doing this and doing that. But if our thoughts were spiritual in nature, we would feel divine consolation and be cured of headaches. These days I stress simplicity to lay people, too, because many of the things they do are not necessary, and they end up being consumed by anxiety. I speak to them of austerity and asceticism. I constantly scold them. If you want to get rid of anxiety, simplify your lives. That is how most divorces start. People have to do too many things, too many obligations, and they get dizzy. Both parents work and abandon the children. The result is fatigue and nervousness, which causes small issues to turn into large quarrels and then automatic divorces. That's where they end up. But if they simplified their lives, they would find rest and joy. Stress is catastrophic. Once I was at a very plush house where they told me in conversation, "We live in paradise while other people are in such great need." "You live in Hades," I replied. God said to the rich man, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you." Luke 12:20. If Christ were to ask me, "Where should I put you, in a house like this or in a prison?" I would reply, "In a dark prison." Because a prison would do me good. It would remind me of Christ, the holy martyrs, the ascetics who lived in the holes of the earth. It would remind me of monastic life. The prison would resemble my cell a bit, and I would be happy. But what would this palace of a house remind me of, and how would that help me? That is why I find prison cells much more restful than a worldly living room. I even find it more restful than a beautiful monastic cell. I would rather spend 1,000 nights in a prison cell than one day in a plush house. Once, when I was staying with a friend in Athens, he asked me to receive a family man who could only see me very early in the morning at dawn because that was the only time he had available. He arrived in a cheerful mood, praising God in every other word. He was full of humility and simplicity and begged me to pray for his family. This brother, who was about 38 years old, he had 7 children. At home, they were 11 souls because his parents lived with him, and they all shared the same room. He spoke with great simplicity. He said, "The room fits us all if we stand up, but if we lie down, it's a bit tight. Thank God, now we're constructing a shed to use as a kitchen, and we are doing fine, Father." He said, "At least we have a roof over our head, while other people live in the open air." The man was an ironer. He lived in Athens and had to leave every day before dawn to arrive in Piraeus in time for work in a dry cleaning shop. He was suffering from varicose veins as a result of having to stand up all the time, and his legs bothered him a lot. But his love for his family made him forget his pain and discomfort. In fact, he pitied himself constantly for not having, as he said, any love in his heart because he did not do any acts of Christian charity. And he praised his wife for being charitable. Apparently, besides taking care of her children and her parents-in-law, she would wash the clothes of some elderly men in the neighborhood, tidy up their homes, and even cook a little something like soup for them. You could see divine grace depicted on the face of this good family man. He had Christ in his heart and was full of joy, just like his one-room house was filled with heavenly bliss. Well, compare this man with people who do not have Christ in their heart. They're filled with anxiety. Take two of them and try to fit them in a house large enough for 11 people. They will not find a way to fit. Even some spiritual people will sometimes not be able to live together no matter how much space they have available, because they don't have the fullness of Christ in their heart. If the women of Pharasa could see our luxuries, especially in some of the monasteries, they would say, "We have abandoned God and he will send down fire to burn us." I remember them performing all their chores in a matter of seconds. They had to take the goats out first thing in the morning, then tidy up the house. After that, they would go to the chapels or gather in caves, and those who could read would read the life of the saints of the day. Next, they would do their prostrations and say the Jesus prayer, and they would work and work and work without getting tired. Those days, a woman had to know how to mend clothes, and they would mend the clothes by hand. There were a few sewing machines in cities, but no sewing machines in the villages, and if I remember right, in the whole town of Pharasa, there was one, maybe two. They used to sew their family's clothes, and they were very comfortable to wear. They would also knit socks by hand. They had a caring taste, Maraki, but they also had enough time for all these chores because they did things in a simple way. The people of Pharasa did not pay attention to details. They enjoyed the joy of monastic life. And if, for example, the blanket did not sit right from one side of the bed, and you told them, "Straighten out the blanket," they would respond, "Why? Does it prevent you from praying?" This kind of joyful monastic life is unknown today. Most people believe that they should not go into any trouble or be deprived of anything. But if they thought in monastic terms and lived with more simplicity, they would find the peace they were seeking. Instead, they're filled with anxiety and despair. They say, so-and-so was very successful because he built 2 apartment buildings, or because he learned 5 languages, and so on. And I do not even own 1 apartment, and I do not even speak 1 foreign language. Oh, I'm good for nothing. A person with a car thinks, "Man, this man has a better car, I should buy one too." So he buys the better car. But he feels no joy because someone else has an even better one. He buys the even better one. Then he learns that others have their own private airplanes, and he's unhappy again. There's no end to this, but a person who doesn't have a car rejoices when he praises God. "Thank God," he says, "even if I do not have a car, I have strong legs and I can walk." How many people are there in the world who do not have legs, who cannot take care of their needs, and can't even go for walks? I at least have my legs. And a lame person says, there are some people who are missing both legs, and that makes him rejoice. Ingratitude and greed cause a lot of harm. The person possessed by material things is always possessed by worries and anxiety because he trembles at the thought that he may lose both his belongings and his soul. One such wealthy man came from Athens. He told me, "Father, my children will not listen to me anymore. I have lost them." "How many children do you have?" I asked him. "Two," he said. "I raised them in luxury. They had everything they wanted. I even bought them a car." In the course of the conversation, I found out that he and his wife each had their own car. "Dear man," I said, "instead of solving your problems, you made them worse. Now you need a large garage to put all the cars and a mechanic to service them. You will have to pay him fourfold, and moreover, all four of you are in danger of killing yourselves at any time. On the contrary, if you had simplified your life, your family would be united, and you would have understanding for each other, and none of the problems you're describing here. It's not your children's fault. It is your fault for not trying to educate them in other ways. A family does not need 4 cars, a garage, and a mechanic, and so on. Let each of you reach his destination a bit late. All these conveniences beget difficulties." Another family man, he arrived at my cell once. He had a family of 5. He told me, "Father, we have a car, and we're thinking of buying another 2. It would help us a lot." I said, "Did you think of how difficult this is going to make your life? If you have 1 car, you can easily park it somewhere. Where are you going to put 3 of them? You'll need a garage and an extra tank of fuel. Moreover, you will put your life in danger. It's better to have only 1 car and limit your outings. You will have time to see your children. You will have peace of mind. Simplifying one's life is the most important thing." "I never thought of that," he replied. Yet a man told us that twice he could not stop his car alarm. The first time it was due to a fly, and the second time he tried to get in the car the wrong way. People's lives are sheer misery because they do not simplify things. Most of the conveniences we have cause difficulties. Those who live in the world often suffocate from abundance. They've filled their life with gadgets and devices, but this only makes it more difficult to enjoy. If we don't simplify things, one convenience will result into numerous difficulties, and we will end up miserable. When we were little, we used to cut off the spool at the end and put a wedge in it, turning it into a nice and enjoyable game for ourselves. Small kids enjoy playing with the toy car much more than their father enjoys his new Mercedes. If one asks a little girl, "What do you want, a doll or an apartment building?" you'll see that she will say, "A doll." But in the end, small children too get to know the vanity of the world. Yet under what helps them most when one is trying to grasp the joy of austerity? It helps if you can grasp the deeper meaning of life. "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Simplicity begins from there. So does every proper approach of life. Chapter 4. External noise and internal peace. Peaceful nature is now spoiled. Most of the devices that people use these days for their comfort are so noisy. They've turned nature, which is always so peaceful, crazy with all this noise. Using all these modern means, they've managed to spoil it. Remember how serene it was before? How does man manage to destroy and be destroyed without even realizing? Now, we have all learned to live with noise. In fact, there are many children who cannot study without listening to rock and roll music. In other words, they find it more restful to study with music rather than in peace and quiet. The reason this external unrest makes them comfortable is because they feel unrest inside. There is noise everywhere. You constantly hear a buzz. Buzz when they cut wood, buzz when they sandpaper it, and buzz when they spray with the vaporizer. In the future, they'll even invent vaporizers the size of airplanes that will make even more noise, and they will say, "Oh, these are better because they spray from above and do not leave even a single bud unsprayed." And of course, everybody will want to buy from those producers and will be so pleased for having done so. Someone wants to drill a hole in the wall. and he plugs in the electric drill. All this noise, and what does he achieve? He drills a hole in the water. And the funny thing is that he is so proud of it. When it gets hot and he wants to cool it off, he goes and buys an electric fan. In the old days, if you wanted to cool off, you would use a simple hand fan. Now you must go deaf first. Even in the sea, everything's become so noisy. In the old days, ships, they sailed by quiet. Now even the smallest motorboat is so noisy. Pretty soon people will be going everywhere in an aeroplane. And you realize the earth absorbs some of the noise, but the air does not. May God help us. They have even ruined the sacred places. The restless, secular spirit of our times, with its supposed civilization, has unfortunately destroyed even the sacred sites of the desert that bring so much peace and sanctification to our souls. The restless person cannot find peace. They have not left any place on earth in peace. They've even gotten hold of the Holy Land. As mentioned in the biography of Hermit Photini, footnote, the Hermit Photini of Greek parentage was born in Damascus, Syria, around January 7th, 1860. Around 1884, she departed from the desert beyond the Jordan River. In 1915, the First World War forced her to move to Jerusalem, where she remained till the end of the war. Then she went to the desert west of the Dead Sea, where she became an ascetic till her death. See Archimandrite Joachim Spetzeres' Hermit Photini from the Calivia and Nuskit, Holy Mountain, 1994. Continue. As mentioned in the biography of Hermit Photini, kiosks and cantinas have been built in the desert where once she had lived in as an ascetic. Inside the actual ascetic cells, where so many saintly people had lived, the British were selling refreshments. There goes the desert. It is now full of houses, radios, stores, hotels, and airports. What St. Cosmas had once predicted has now happened. Quote, a time will come when gypsies will hang their instruments, where our brave young men now hang their weapons. I mean to say that we've come down to that too, where monks once lived ascetic lives, weaving their komboskinia and saying their prayers. We now have radios and soft drinks. Anyway, it seems to me that in a few years we will not anymore need all these things. The way we are going, it seems that life is coming to an end. The end of life. The end of the world is near. Yet is there a quiet place left on the holy mountain of Athos? No. Even there you cannot find a quiet spot. Everywhere you go, they're opening up forest roads. Cars are everywhere. Even the most remote and quiet places can now be reached by car. I wonder what these people are seeking in the desert. When a gentle wind from the desert stirred the reeds, Arsenios the Great would say, "What sound is this? Is it an earthquake?" Footnote, one day Abba Arsenios came to a place where there were reeds blowing in the wind. Abba Arsenios said to the brothers, "What is this movement?" And they said, "Some reeds." Then the Abba said to them, "When one is living in silent prayer, hears the song of a little sparrow, his heart no longer experiences the same peace. How much worse is it when you hear the movement of these reeds?" From the sayings of the Desert Fathers, Abba Arsenios. To continue. I wonder what the Holy Fathers would have said if they'd seen and heard what is happening today. In the old days, certain monks, especially those who served in the refectory or in the hospitality house of the big Cenobitic monasteries, would get very tired. They had to wash dishes, scrub the copper utensil, and so on. Today they have conveniences, modern devices, and most of them are noisy. I remember in our monastery we used to carry water in containers from a spring and would slowly lift it to the third floor with a windlass. Now they bring the water up with an engine and you hear its constant noise. The walls shake and the window panes creak. They should at least put a sound barrier around it. When I was serving in the army during the guerrilla war, I used to charge the radio battery using a silencer so the noise would not bother the people nearby. One day, some monks came to my cell and started speaking very loudly. I said to one of them, "Speak more softly, they can hear us over there." He continued to speak loudly. "Lower your voice," I repeated. "Oh, bless me, Father," he finally said. "We have a generator in the monastery and we've become accustomed to speaking loudly to hear each other." Can you believe that? Instead of saying the Jesus prayer and speaking in a low voice, they shout because they get used to having a generator. We are getting to be like those young people who interfere with the exhaust pipe of their bikes and make all this noise. This same spirit has penetrated into our monasteries. That's where we are headed. And people are really enjoying being loud. I saw one of the sisters this morning. She resembled an astronaut. She was descending the slope with a hat on her head, a mask over her mouth and nose, and the lawnmower in her hand, totally satisfied with herself. Even the astronauts were not as satisfied with themselves when they returned from the moon. Shortly after that, I heard the noise of the lawnmower. I looked over and saw that she was cutting the weeds with it. The idea is to leave no place in peace. As soon as she finished, another person came with an even louder machine and started plowing. The plow ran here, it ran there, plowing the ground. Then another noisy machine was used to straighten the plowed soil. See what's happened to us? But yet under these machines, they make our lives easier. Oh, there are too many of these devices around. You must avoid noise and loud sounds as much as possible. This constant buzzing removes us from the real monastic way of life. Why then do you have a sign outside that says hezekasterion, derived from the Greek term hezekia, meaning stillness? Why do not write buzzing place or place of unrest? What is the use of the monastery if there's no peace and tranquility? Try where possible to reduce the noise around you. I say that you have not yet experienced the sweet Hezekiah, because if you did, you would understand both me and what I am trying to say. If you had tasted the spiritual fruit of Hezekiah, you would become so concerned about losing it that you would pursue it in earnest at all times. Tranquility is mystical prayer. When the monk makes use of all these noisy devices, he does away with the preconditions for prayer and the monastic way of life. For this reason, we should avoid using noisy devices as much as possible. What people today consider to be conveniences do not actually help the monk achieve his goal. A monk cannot find in such a noisy environment what he set out to find by becoming a monk. To be tranquil is very important. Even if one is not actually praying, tranquility will put him in a state of prayer. Much like our imperceptible breathing, tranquility is mystical prayer and of great help to those who seek to pray. Those who labor spiritually while in a state of tranquility will lose themselves in the Jesus prayer. Do you know what it really means to lose oneself that way? When a small child rests contently in his mother's arms, he's quiet, he doesn't talk. The two are now united in deep communication. This is why it is good for monasteries to be located in isolated areas, away from the rest of the world, away from archaeological sites, worldly noises, and great numbers of people. External tranquility, living away from the world, along with discerning asceticism and unceasing prayer, will soon bring about the inner tranquility, the peace of the soul, which is an essential precondition for the more refined and more profound prayer of the heart. When one attains this state, he is no longer disturbed by any external distractions, since in reality it is only his body that is on earth, while his mind is in heaven. You hear the noise only if you want to hear it. Yananda, What can someone do if noise is involved when carrying out his duties, or if a noisy machine is required to do his work? When our duties must be done in a noisy environment, a quiet chant is very helpful. If you cannot concentrate to say the Jesus prayer, then chant. You must be patient. When I travel from Athos to Thessaloniki, the boat is very noisy. I sit in a corner with my eyes closed as if I was asleep, and I chant. I chant everything you can imagine. I chant the actyually and the Athos many times. The boat makes a clatter that accompanies my chanting really well. This clatter actually keeps the right tone for Papanilakoulos, actyually and Neos' Athos. It fits with everything. I chant mentally, but my heart participates too. At any rate, I think that it's not so much the external noise that is disturbing, but one's internal concerns and anxieties. You can always avoid hearing noises, but you cannot avoid worries. The root of it all is the mind. Our eyes could be looking at something without really seeing it. When I am praying, I may have my eyes open, but I don't really see anything. I am walking and perhaps observing a landscape and so on, but not really seeing it. When someone has difficulty in saying the Jesus prayer in a noisy place, it is because his mind is not completely given to God. A person must attain a kind of divine absence of mind in order to experience inner tranquility and not be distracted by noise while praying. One can actually attain such a state of divine absent-mindedness where he no longer hears the noise, or he hears it only when he wants to, or actually when his mind comes back from heaven. And one can reach this point if he works spiritually, if he struggles. Then he will hear the sounds around him only when he wants to. When I was in the army, I said to one of the fellow soldiers who was pious, "Hey, we'll meet at such and such a place." "But there's a loudspeaker there," he replied. "Oh, if one wants to hear, he will hear. If he does not want to hear, he will not hear." When our mind is very concentrated on some particular thing, do we hear anything? In the forest, across from my cell, they've stripped the mountain with chainsaws. When I was absorbed in reading or praying, I did not hear anything. When I stopped, then I heard everything. We should respect other people's need for tranquility. When we are not the cause of noise, it does not matter. God sees that. But when we are the cause, then it's bad, which is why we must be careful not to disturb others. If one does not want to pray, he should at least not interfere with the praying of others. If you realized how easy it is to harm a person who is praying, you would be very careful. For if one does not take care to be quiet out of respect for others, but also because he himself feels the need to be quiet, he will not do it wholeheartedly out of love, but will act out of necessity and a sense of obligation, and the outcome will not be good. When one feels coerced and acts out of a sense of duty, thinking, "Now I must walk this way so that I will not disturb. Now I must not walk freely as I wish," and so on, respecting the tranquility of others becomes such a burden. The point is to be mindful of others who are praying and to do it willingly and with joy, precisely because they are praying and communicating with God. These two attitudes are totally different. Whatever one does with his heart, he enjoys it and it helps him. And when he feels in his heart the need to respect his fellow human being who is praying, he also has a sense of awe afterwards. When we have respect for the other person, we have respect for ourselves, and we do not consider our own self first, because instead of self-love, we have sacrificial love, unselfish love, philotimo. We must put ourselves in the other person's place. We should think, if I were in his place, how would I want people to treat me? If I were tired, if I were praying, would I want people to bang doors like that? When we put ourselves in another's place, things change. How beautiful life was in the Cenobitic monasteries in the past. There was such peace. There was even a clock. that struck every quarter of an hour to remind each of us to say the Jesus prayer. Even if someone were distracted and forgot, the clock would remind him to pray again. The clock helped a lot. When the fathers were saying the prayer, there was so much tranquility inside the monastery. There were 60 fathers in Mycenobium on the Holy Mountain, but it felt as if there was only one hesychist. In church, only a few people chanted while the majority prayed noetically. The same was happening when the different monastic chores and duties were being carried out. There was stillness, quiet everywhere. They did not speak loudly or shout. They all did their assigned work quietly. They all moved about quietly, like sheep. There was always a silent movement in the holy monastery. It was not like today where they've put aside a specific time for the various duties, a time for chores, a time for quiet, a time for curfew. In the past, each person moved according to his assignment. We must develop a love and a respect for the blessed desert. We want its holy solitude and sweet stillness to help us become peaceful, get rid of our passions, and approach God. We must be vigilant not to adapt the sacred desert to our passionate selves. This would be a great impiety. It would be like going on a pilgrimage to holy Golgotha with a bouzouki. Good thoughts are the antidote to noise. Since unfortunately modern man uses noisy devices even for small things, it is important, if we ever find ourselves in a noisy place, to cultivate good thoughts to counter the noise. It is not right to demand, do not use this and do not use that because it makes noise. It is better to immediately bring good thoughts to mind. For example, when you hear a spraying machine, try to imagine that it's coming from a helicopter. Think of something like, a sister could have been gravely ill at this time, and a helicopter could have been coming to take her to the hospital. How troublesome would the noise have been then? Oh, thank God we're all well now. This is where you should be applying your mind and cleverness to the art of bringing good thoughts to mind. For example, when you hear the noise of the cement mixer and its pumping equipment, which elevates the cement, you should be thinking, thank God it's not a bombardment. Houses are not being destroyed. People are living in peace and are building houses. Yet under what happens when the nerves are shattered? Shattered nerves? Well, what does that mean? Could it be that your thoughts are scattered? Or your thoughts are shattered? There's nothing better than a good thought. A layman had built a house in a quiet place. Shortly afterwards, a garage was built on one side, a new road on the other, and an entertainment center with music till midnight on the other. The poor man could not sleep. He put on earplugs and started taking sleeping pills. He was going mad. He came to see me. Yet under this is the situation, he told me, and I cannot find peace. What must I do? I am thinking of building another house. You should bring good thoughts to mind, I replied. You should think that if a war was going on and tanks were being made in the garage next door, and the hospital was receiving the wounded, and you were told, stay here, we will guarantee your safety and no harm will come you in this area. Wouldn't you think that this is a great thing and consider it a blessing? That is why you should be saying to yourself, thank God there's no war. People are well, going about their business. In the garage, they're repairing cars instead of making tanks. There is no hospital and casualties of war. There are no tanks passing by, but cars, transporting people to their business. Bring such good thoughts to mind, and a doxology will fill your heart. Thus, the poor man understood that what matters most is to confront these problems appropriately, and he left in peace. Little by little, he managed to deal with the situation with good thoughts, and eventually threw away the pills and began sleeping without difficulty. Do you see how a good thought can take care of one's troubles? Once I was on a bus, and the conductor turned the music on really loud. Well, some spiritual young men pointed out to him that there was a monk on the bus, and they repeatedly made signs to him to turn it off. They tried once, twice, but without result. He turned the music even louder. "Hey, let him be," I told the young men. "It does not matter. It keeps the drone tone to my chanting." God forbid, I said to myself, but if there was an accident further down the road and they were forced to put the injured people in our bus, how would I bear to see people with broken legs, broken heads? Thank God that people are not only well, but they're even singing. So I had a great trip, chanting anyway. Let me tell you another example to see how a good thought can help us appropriately in any situation. I was in Jerusalem once with an acquaintance of mine. There was some sort of festivity there. They were celebrating a feast and constantly crying out. It was a madhouse. Sing to him with loud shouts, praise him with loud clashing cymbals. You could not understand what they were saying, and it went on all night long. My acquaintance got upset and went to the window. He did not sleep a wink, while I slept like a bird by just bringing to mind a good thought. I remembered the scene of the exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt, and this provided me with a sense of spiritual exaltation. This is how you too should confront any situation, with good thoughts. Let's say, for example, a door slammed. You must say, if, God forbid, something bad had happened to a sister, if she fell and broke her leg, would I be sleeping now? Here, as it is, it was only a door that slammed. A sister must have had something to take care of. But if one starts criticizing and saying, "Here she goes again, slamming the door, she's so careless," there's no way that one who thinks this way can find peace. The moment you start having such thoughts, the devil will come to upset you even more. Or let's say one of you hears an alarm going off at night. You hear it go off once, and in a while you hear it go off again. If you start thinking, "Man, this soul must have been very tired. She could not get up. It is good that she slept another half hour." And then she got up to do her spiritual duties. If the sister brings such thoughts to mind, she will not be annoyed and upset because someone woke her up. But if she thinks only of herself and how the alarm clock woke her up, then all she'll be thinking is, "Whatever is going on in this place, no one can ever get some rest." This is why the benefit you receive from a good thought, you will never get from any other ascesis. It is the inner tranquility that we must acquire. Our goal should be to take all that comes our way and make the best out of it, for the sake of the spiritual struggle in which we are engaged. We must strive to acquire the inner tranquility, and to this end even noise can become a good thing if it is met with the right thought. What matters the most is handling a problem in the right way. We must face up to everything using good thoughts. When in the very midst of noise, you manage to reach inner tranquility, you have achieved something of great value. If you cannot find tranquility in the midst of disturbance, you will not be able to be tranquil even in the midst of tranquility. When inner tranquility comes to a man, everything inside him will be tranquil, and he will not be disturbed by anything. But if he requires external tranquility in order to find inner tranquility, then when he does not find himself in such a place, he will want a cane to chase away the cicadas by day and the jackal by night, so that they will not bother him. In other words, he will be chasing away what in fact the devil is gathering. What do you think the devil's job is, after all? His job is to create difficulties and to obstruct our efforts until he has completely turned us upside down. Once in a ski, two very old monks got a donkey that had a bell on him. A young monk who wished to practice Hezekiah complained about the donkey's bell and used all the canons to proved that donkeys should not be allowed in a skeet. The other father said that they were not bothered by it at all. So I said to him, "Isn't it enough for you that the old men do not bother us at all, but take care of their own needs with the donkey? If it did not have a bell, they would lose it, and then we would have to go looking for it. Why complain about a good thing? If we do not have such good thoughts and make the best of all situations and matters spiritual, we will not meet with success, even if we were to live next to saints. Let's say that I find myself at a military base. I should think of the trumpet as a church bell, and the weapon should remind me of the spiritual weapons against the devil. If we don't use all situations in a spiritual way, even a bell will annoy us. We have two choices. Either we will utilize them for the right purpose, or the devil will take advantage of them. The restless person will carry his restlessness even into the desert. What a soul must acquire first is the ability to find inner tranquility in the midst of external disturbance. Only then will tranquility be found in the stillness of the desert. Chapter 5. Too many worries will distance us from God. We must not create too many fronts. People today do not live simply, and for this reason they suffer from too many distractions. They open too many fronts of activity and lose themselves in endless solicitude. As for me, I just try to take care of one or two things, and then I start thinking about something else. I never try to do too many things at the same time. Let's say that I'm thinking of doing this particular thing. Well, first I finish it, and then I start thinking about doing something else. For if I do not finish what I have started, I cannot find peace. When someone has too many things to do at once, he loses his mind. Just thinking about all of them at once can cause someone to become schizophrenic. Once a young man with psychological problems came to my cell. He told me that he suffered from a hypersensitivity which he inherited from his parents. I said to him, "What is this hereditary stuff you're talking about? First of all, you need to get some rest. Then you must get back to school and earn your degree. After that, go and fulfill your military service, and when you're done, look for a job." He followed my advice and found his way. That is how people can come to their senses. Yaranda, I tire easily when I work. I do not know what is to blame for it. What you seem to be lacking is patience. And the reason you cannot be patient is that you undertake too many things. You spread yourself too thin and you tire easily. This makes you nervous because you have philotimo, and when you cannot do something well, you get anxious. When I was in the Cenobitic monastery, there was a monk named Isidore who served with me in the carpenter shop. He had no patience at all. He would start working on a window, then he would get worried and stop. Next he would start on a door, he would get upset and quit. Then he started working on roofs. He would stop in the middle of something and leave everything unfinished. He ended up losing some of the wood or cutting it the wrong size. This is how one can break his back and achieve nothing in the end. There are some people who have limited abilities and can do only one or two things well. When they get involved in too many activities, they end up doing nothing right and drag others along too. As much as possible, one should do one or two things only. Complete them correctly, and then with a clear mind and a rested body get started on something else. For a scattered mind will not be able to do quality spiritual work. How will he be able to remember Christ? Do not give your heart to material things. Yaranda, what do you mean when you say give your legs and your hands to work, but not your heart? I mean that you should not give your heart to material things. Some people give their whole self to material things. They spend the entire day trying to do a job well and don't think of God at all. We should not end up there. When you work, you should use your hands and your legs, but you should not let your mind stray away from God. You should not give all your being, all your energy, and your heart to material things. This way one becomes a pagan, an idol worshiper. Do your best at work, but do not give your heart to the work you do. Give only your hands, your mind. Do not give your heart to hopeless, useless things. If you do, then how will your heart leap for Christ? When the heart is with Christ, then even the work we do is sanctified. Our soul is at rest, and there's real joy in our heart. Make the most of your heart. Do not waste it. If the heart is squandered on many insignificant things, it will not have the endurance to feel pain for the one right thing that it should care about. I will give my heart to a cancer patient, to someone who is suffering. I agonize over the young people in danger. I pray that God will enlighten them. When I have people around me, all I care for is the pain the other person feels and the love that we must have for each other. I am not even aware of my own pain. Thus one comes to forget his own troubles. His life now takes a new direction. Yarunda, is it possible not to give your mind and heart to all types of work? When the task is simple, it helps if the mind is not absorbed. But when the task is complex, then it makes sense to become somewhat absorbed mentally, but not to let that take over the heart. How does it take over the heart? How? Well, temptation comes and puts it to sleep with morphine. It gets hold of the heart with egotism. But when the heart surrenders to God, then the intellect rests with God while the mind concentrates on the work. Footnote, the elder implies a distinction between the rational calculating mind and the mind that, together with the heart, the nous, that seeks and rests with God alone. To continue, when we speak of a carefree mind, what do we mean exactly? We mean that when you work, you should not forget Christ. Do your work joyfully, but keep your mind and your heart focused on Christ. If you do this, not only you will not get tired, but you will also be able to do your spiritual work. Work done with peace of mind and prayer is sanctified. Isn't it better, Yanada, to take your time and your jobs slowly in order to maintain your calm? Yes. Because when we work calmly, we maintain our serenity, and then our whole day is sanctified. Unfortunately, we do not realize that when we do our work in a hurry, we become nervous. And when work is done nervously, it is not sanctified. Our goal should not to do many things and be in constant anxiety. This is a demonic condition. When monastic handicrafts are made with peace of mind and prayer, they are sanctified, and they also sanctify the people who use them. Then it makes sense for lay people to seek these handicrafts from us as a blessing. By contrast, any work made with haste and nervousness transmits this demonic condition to others. Work done with haste and anxiety is the mark of a very secular person. Instead of giving people a blessing, what these troubled souls impart on others with their handiwork is their troubled state. A person's state affects not only the work that he does, but also the materials, the wood, that he is using. The final product of a man's work reflects his spiritual state. If he is upset and angry and swears, his work will not bring a blessing to others. But if he chants, if he says the Jesus prayer, his work is sanctified. The first condition is demonic, the other is divine. If you act with piety and pray while you are working, you are always sanctified, and everything around you becomes sanctified. When one has God in mind, his works and his handicrafts are also sanctified. Let us say, for example, that I am making a box while saying the Jesus prayer. I am praying and at the same time working for the glory of God. My goal is not to make boxes and to do it quickly, to produce a lot of them and end up full of anxiety. That would be a demonic state. We did not come to the monastery for this. We came to be sanctified and to sanctify whatever we do. This is the reason why sometimes you feel like a good employee performing your assigned tasks. You get so busy running around doing your job that you forget to take Christ with you. But if you begin your work with the Jesus prayer, you will feel like a servant of Christ. So, if you want to be sanctified and to sanctify your work, Make sure that you make the Jesus prayer a part of everything you do. Do you know how abundantly God will bless you then, and how many good things and blessings he will send your way? Yet when the task is mental, such as translation, how can you possibly say the Jesus prayer to sanctify the work you're doing? When the task requires mental concentration, your work will be sanctified when your mind is focused on God. Then you will be living in the atmosphere of God, even if you are not able to say the prayer. When one reaches a spiritual state, he is greatly helped by this. He does not attempt to understand the meanings of words based on reason alone, but gets to know them by divine illumination. And what happens when I must undertake this type of work, but have not yet reached such a spiritual state? In that case, you must still go ahead, do the work, but you need to pray and ask God to enlighten you. You must do your best to find help in these divine meanings, what divine illumination allows, and to work with piety. Make sure that you take a short break every 1 or 2 hours. Say the Jesus prayer. Yet especially in translation work, one has many distractions. You must consult dictionaries, read commentaries, and so on. As I have already said in the past, what helps in translation work is to live on a daily basis with purified thoughts that make a person a receptacle of grace. Then divine interpretation will come from divine illumination, and not from the mind, the dictionary, or the pen. What I'm trying to say is that we must rely on the divine rather than the human, on what comes first, not on what comes second. Too many worries make people forget God. Yet does worrying about too many things take us away from God? Look, let me try to explain. When a little child is playing and is all absorbed with his toys, he's not aware that his father may be next to him, caressing him. If he interrupts his play a bit, then he will become aware of his father's caresses. Similarly, when we are preoccupied with too many activities and are anxiously concerned about them, when we worry too much about worldly matters, we cannot become aware of God's love. God gives, but we do not sense it. Be careful not to waste your precious energy on redundant worries and vanities, which will turn to dust one day. When you do this, you not only tire your body, but you also scatter your mind aimlessly, offering God only your fatigue and yawns at the time of prayer, much like the sacrifice offered by Cain. It follows that your inner state will be like that of Cain's. You will be full of anxiety and sighs provoked by the devil standing by your side. We must not waste aimlessly the fruit, the inner core of our power, and then leave the shells for God. The many cares of life sap the marrow of our heart and leave nothing for Christ. If you notice that your mind constantly wanders off to various chores that you have to do, you must realize that you are not doing well spiritually, and this should alarm you because you have distanced yourself from God. You must realize that you are closer to material things than you are to God, closer to creation than to the Creator. Many times, unfortunately, even a monk will be deceived and draw a worldly form of pleasure from his work. It is in man's nature to do good because his Creator is good, but the monk is striving to transform himself from a human being into an angelic being. This is why when it comes to material things, his work must be limited to the bare necessities, so that he will have time for spiritual work. Then, the joy that he feels will come from the fruit of his spiritual labor. It will be a spiritual joy, abundant nourishment for himself and for everybody else. Those who work too hard and are full of worries forget God. Father Tikhon used to say, the Pharaoh gave the Israelites too much work and just enough food to forget God. In our days, the devil has made people lose themselves in matter, all kinds of distractions. They work too much and they eat too much. This way they come to forget God. And they lose the ability, or rather the will, to make good use of the freedom given to them, to sanctify their soul. Fortunately, However, and against the devil's desires, there is a good side to this. People are so busy that they don't have enough time to sin as much as they would have liked to. Too much work and worry is the mark of a secular monk. It is advisable for people who wish to live spiritually, especially monastics, to avoid certain pursuits which obstruct them from their spiritual goal. They should not get involved in endless tasks, for there is never an end to work. If monks or nuns do not learn to do the internal spiritual work, they will seek to escape in external activities. People who attempt to complete endless tasks will end their lives with all kinds of spiritual imperfections, and when they reach the end of their road, they will repent for having done so. It will be too late because their passport will have already been issued. After all, it's necessary to take time off from work, even for a short while. When we reduce the number of our chores, there will come naturally a bodily rest and a thirst for inner spiritual work, which comforts and never tires us. Then the soul will breathe an abundance of spiritual oxygen. Fatigue from spiritual work does not make us tired. Instead, it rests and refreshes us, because it lifts us and brings us closer to our loving Father, where our soul rejoices. When physical fatigue lacks a spiritual sense, or rather when it is not the result of a spiritual need, and therefore justified, it rouses anger in man and makes him rough. Even the most tamed and good-tempered horse, when overworked, will start kicking and developing a bad temper, despite the fact that normally they are supposed to become more gentle with age. There are some things that can always be left out, so that spiritual matters may take precedence. Too much work and too many worries will make a monk secular, and give him a secular sensibility. His life will then be full of stress and secular anxiety, and he will experience in this life a portion of hell, endless cares, worries, and disasters. But when the monk has no concern for material things, and is instead mindful only of his salvation, and the salvation of all human beings, then he has God as his steward and men as his helpers. Do you remember the incident with Father Gerondios and his spiritual son? See Athonite Fathers and Athonite Matters, hail to Paisios of the Holy Mountain.